The morning after my brother's wedding, I opened my banking app out of habit, the way you check your phone before you're even fully awake. And I sat up so fast, I knocked my water glass off the nightstand. My business account showed $4 and 7 cents. 3 days earlier, it had $87,500. That was every dollar I had saved over 2 years of 60-hour weeks. My emergency renovation fund for the duplex I just bought in Hamilton. My entire financial cushion. Gone. I remember sitting on the edge of that hotel bed in my bridesmaid dress still hanging on the bathroom door. My hands shaking so badly, I had to set the phone down on the duvet and breathe. I thought it was a bank error. I genuinely thought, okay, something glitched. Call the number on the back of the card, they'll fix it. That's what I thought for about 4 minutes. Then I called my uncle. He picked up on the second ring, which he never does. Hey, sweetheart. His voice was too smooth, too prepared. I need you to tell me what happened to my account, I said. There was a pause. Not a confused pause, a calculating one. Claudia. He said my name the way he always did when he was about to explain something to me like I was 12. Your aunt and I were in a tight spot. You know how the restaurant has been. We needed a bridge loan, just temporary. And we knew you had the funds sitting there. And you figured, I repeated, it's family. You would have said yes. I hung up. I should tell you who my uncle is. His name is Patrick. And for most of my life, he was my favorite person. My mother's younger brother. The one who showed up at every school play, who drove me to university orientation, who gave the most genuinely funny speech at every family dinner because he could read a room better than anyone I'd ever met. My Aunt Suzanne was warm and loud and always smelled like whatever she was cooking. They ran a Portuguese restaurant in Mississauga for 20 years. I grew up at one of those corner tables doing homework. My parents divorced when I was 9. My dad moved to Calgary and built a whole separate life that I was adjacent to, not part of. My mom worked evenings. Patrick and Suzanne were the stable center of things for a long time, which is exactly why I had made the mistake I made. 8 months before the wedding, I bought a duplex in Hamilton. I know, timing, but the market had corrected enough that it finally made sense. And I'd been saving for 4 years and my mortgage broker said the numbers worked. I put the renovation budget in a separate account at a different bank just to keep it lean. Patrick knew about it because I told him at Easter, excited, showing him the listing on my phone while we stood in Suzanne's kitchen waiting for the chicken to come out of the oven. He asked, which bank? I told him. I even got help me, showed him the app when I pulled it up to show him the unit photos. I wasn't thinking. It was Easter Sunday and I was happy and he was my uncle. What I didn't know until later was that he'd seen me type my pen. My brother Theo's wedding was in Niagara-on-the-Lake. The whole family was there. My mom, my gran, cousins. I see twice a year, Theo's in-laws. Patrick and Suzanne had flown in from a trip to Portugal 2 days before, which I remember thinking was a lot of travel for 1 week. I now think they'd been moving money around before they came back and needed to time it. The wedding was beautiful. I cried during the vows. Theo and his husband have been together for 8 years, and watching my little brother marry the person who makes him the happiest I've ever seen him. I wasn't going to hold it together, and I didn't try. Patrick gave a toast. It was good. Of course it was good. That night at the reception, I left my phone in my clutch and danced until my feet hurt. I bought a round of drinks for my cousins. I ate a piece of cake at midnight and felt genuinely uncomplicated happy. I checked my account at 7:14 the next morning. Here's what they had done exactly, because I think you should understand the precision of it. Patrick had been to my apartment twice in the month before the wedding. Once to help me move a couch I bought off Facebook Marketplace. I'd asked him, he'd offered his truck. Once for dinner, spontaneously, when he called and said he and Suzanne were in the neighborhood. The second visit, I left him alone in the kitchen for maybe 20 minutes while I was on a work call in my bedroom. My laptop was on the kitchen table. He'd used my laptop to access my account, logged in with my credentials. He'd watched me type them at Easter, and I used the same password format, which I know. And he had set up a third-party transfer to a numbered account. He didn't take it all at once. He'd done 2 transfers, $50,000 the week before the wedding, $30,483 the day Theo and I flew to Niagara. He left $4.117, which I now understand was to avoid triggering an overdraft alert. He had thought about this for a while. I drove home from Niagara in silence. My mom called twice. I let it go to voicemail. I needed to think before I talked to anyone because I knew if I opened my mouth before I decided what to do, I was going to blow everything up in the wrong direction. I want to be clear that I was not calm. I was not the composed, strategic person I'm going to sound like for the rest of the story. I cried for about 45 minutes somewhere on the QEW, pulled over at a Tim Hortons in Burlington, sat in the parking lot, and sobbed in a way I haven't since my dad's second wedding when I was 15, and I ate an entire bag of chips in the hotel bathroom because I didn't know where else to put the feeling. I called my best friend Adize when I got home. She didn't say much. She said, before you do anything, document everything. She's a paralegal. She said it the same way she says most things, which is without drama, which is exactly what I needed. I opened a new Google Doc and started writing down every interaction I could remember. The Easter dinner, the couch move, the dinner at my apartment, the conversation that morning. I wrote Patrick's exact words. I wrote timestamps as best I could reconstruct them. I pulled up my email and found the thread where I told him which bank. I found a text from 7 months ago where he'd asked me, casually, what my renovation timeline was. I found another text 3 weeks before the wedding where he'd asked if I was still with TD or if I'd switched. I had answered. I'd said yes. TD, the account I set up for the reno. I stared at that text for a long time. Then I called the bank. The fraud department at TD was, and I want to say this genuinely, more helpful than I expected. I had the timestamps of the transfers. I had the IP address the bank could confirm was not mine. I had the device ID, which matched neither of my devices. The fraud analyst I spoke to told me that the transfers had originated from a laptop with a specific device fingerprint, and that if I could establish whose laptop that was, I had a strong case. I knew whose laptop it was. What I didn't know yet was how to prove Patrick had been the one using it. I thought about this for 3 days. I went to work. I ate food. I slept badly. I called Adeza every night and she walked me through what I'd need: a police report, the bank's fraud documentation, any evidence placing Patrick at my apartment during the relevant time frame. I had his truck on my building's parking garage camera from the couch day. I had a neighbor who'd waved hello to Patrick in the lobby during the dinner visit. I had the texts. I had the fact that he'd asked which bank and which account type before the transfers happened. I did not call Patrick back. He texted twice. The first text said, Claudia, I know this is a shock, but we need to talk. This was meant to be temporary. The second, 2 days later, your aunt is really upset that you're not responding. This is hard for all of us. I screenshot both immediately and added them to the folder I'd been building. I filed a police report in Hamilton on a Tuesday. The officer was a woman named. She told me her last name, but I was in such a fog I didn't retain it. She was thorough. She took the bank documentation, the texts, the camera footage I'd requested from my building manager. She told me these cases were complicated when it involved family because people were often reluctant to pursue them. I told her I was not reluctant. She looked at me for a moment and said, Good. I want to tell you about the dinner because that's the part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. My gran called me 12 days after the wedding. She's 79, she lives in a seniors building in Brampton, and she calls every Sunday like clockwork. On this particular Sunday, she sounded strange, quieter than usual, and she said Patrick had called her. He told her I was causing trouble over a misunderstanding about money. He said I was threatening to destroy the family over something that was meant to be temporary and that I clearly didn't understand how businesses worked. I asked my gran if she wanted to know what actually happened. She said yes. I told her all of it. The amounts, the dates, the IP address, the text. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, in the particular tone that she reserves for profound disappointment, he has always done this. She told me something I hadn't known. When my grandmother and grandfather were still alive, my grandfather died when I was 6. Patrick had borrowed money from them 3 times. The third time, $12,000 for the restaurant's initial fit-out, he had never paid it back. My grandfather died without seeing a cent of it returned, and my gran had absorbed the loss quietly because Patrick was her son and she hadn't wanted to make it ugly. I should have told your mother, she said. I should have told everyone. I said, you're telling me now. The police investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, I heard from Patrick 4 more times through various channels. Once through my mom, who called me crying and said she didn't know what to believe. And couldn't we all just sit down once through my cousin Bridget, who texted me that Patrick had told her I was trying to have him arrested over a loan. Once through Suzanne, who called from a number I didn't recognize and said in a shaking voice that they were going to pay it back, they just needed time. She'd had no idea he'd done it without asking me, "Please don't do this to the family." I felt genuinely terrible for Suzanne. I still do. I believe her that she didn't know the full shape of it. But the money was gone and the police file was open, and there was nothing I could do to stop the thing that had already started. What I could do was make sure I had everything documented. My mom eventually came around for the record. It took her a few weeks, and she needed to hear it from the bank fraud analyst in plain terms before it fully landed. But she came around. She called me and apologized for asking me to sit down with Patrick before I'd had a chance to deal with it. I told her she didn't have to apologize. She said she wanted to anyway. The moment I want to tell you about, the one I keep coming back to, happened on a Saturday in November, about 8 weeks after the wedding. I was at my duplex in Hamilton. I'd had to delay the renovation by 6 weeks because of everything, but I'd managed to scrape together enough from savings and a small personal loan to at least start demo on the upstairs unit. My contractor was a woman named Patricia who I'd hired based on a referral from RDIEs, and she was efficient and no nonsense, and she'd become, inadvertently, someone I talked to more than I'd expected. I was pulling up the old linoleum in the kitchen, just helping. Patricia had given me a pry-bar and instructions when my phone rang. It was the investigating officer. Patrick had been charged. Fraud over $5,000, unauthorized use of a computer. The evidence had been strong enough, the prosecutor felt, to proceed. The arraignment was scheduled. I put down the pry-bar. I sat on the plywood subfloor in a dusty kitchen in Hamilton, and I looked at a wall with no drywall on it yet, just bare studs, and I felt something that I would describe as the opposite of relief. Not satisfaction. Just the end of a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for 2 months. Patricia came in and saw my face and handed me a coffee from the thermos she always brought. "Good news or bad?" she asked. "Complicated," I said. She nodded like that was a complete answer and got back to work. "I'll tell you how it resolved because I know that's what you're waiting for." Patrick pleaded guilty. I don't know if he had a lawyer who advised it or if he just didn't see another option given the documentation. I wasn't in the room for any of it. The fraud totaled $87,483. He was sentenced to 2 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and full restitution. Full restitution meant he had to repay me every dollar. He doesn't have $87,483. He had to liquidate part of the restaurant, sold the equipment, ended the lease. I'm told Suzanne's family helped cover a portion of it. The restitution payments come in monthly. I receive them automatically. I don't have to interact with Patrick to get them. That was important to me. I didn't want a relationship where I was waiting on him to choose to pay me. My gran came to my duplex in March when I had the upstairs unit mostly finished. I drove to Brampton and picked her up and brought her to Hamilton and showed her the new kitchen cabinets, the refinished hardwood, the bathroom with the hexagon tile I'd agonized over for 3 weeks. She stood in the middle of the living room and looked around and said, "You built something." I said, "I was trying to." She said, "No, you did." Here's the thing about family and money that I wish I'd understood earlier. The people most likely to take from you without asking are also the people who are most fluent in the language of family loyalty. They know exactly how to make the taking feel like it's your failure for not offering. Patrick didn't steal from me because he was a stranger or a predator or a person with no conscience. He stole from me because he had convinced himself over decades that the people who loved him were resources he could draw on when he needed them. My grandparents. My mother, probably, in ways I don't fully know. Eventually, me. The difference was that I had a paper trail and a paralegal best friend and a bank that took fraud seriously. I'm not going to tell you to cut off your family. I can't tell you that, and I wouldn't presume to. I will tell you that loving someone doesn't mean absorbing the cost of what they do. You can love a person and still pick up the phone and call it what it is. I still think about Suzanne sometimes. I hope she's okay. I hope she found something that was just hers. My brother Theo called me last month and said his husband had referred a client to my renovation project. I'd expanded, started doing project management consulting for other small landlords in Hamilton. Just a small thing. But I thought about that Easter Sunday when I showed Patrick my phone, excited about the life I was trying to build. I'm still building it, just with better passwords. I think about the version of myself that sat in that Burlington Tim Hortons parking lot and cried for 45 minutes. And I don't feel embarrassed about her anymore. She was doing the only honest thing available to her in that moment. She was feeling the full weight of what had happened before she decided what to do about it. That's not weakness. That's actually the beginning of everything that came after. What Patrick did had a logic to it, even if the logic was rotten. He had spent decades learning that the people who loved him would absorb the cost of his choices. My grandparents had done it. My gran told me so herself, quietly, on a Sunday call, in the particular tone she saves for things she's carried too long. He hadn't stolen from me because I was a stranger or an easy target. He'd stolen from me because love, in his experience, had always meant a kind of unconditional access. He had mistaken the generosity of the people around him for permission. That's the part that took me the longest to untangle. The difference between someone who does something wrong out of desperation and someone who does something wrong because they have never genuinely believed there would be a consequence. Patrick wasn't panicking when he transferred that money. He was counting on me. He was counting on the version of me that would cry and forgive and eventually let it go because he was family. And family means you absorb it. He miscounted. What I think made the difference, wasn't anger. Anger was there, but anger alone would have just had me calling him back and saying things I couldn't take back. What I had was clarity about what was right, and the patience to act from that clarity instead of from the feeling. Ardeza said, document everything. And I did because I understood that the truth needed to be legible to people who didn't already know it. That's a kind of discipline that doesn't come naturally when you're in pain. You have to choose it deliberately. Every time you pick up the phone to call the fraud line instead of calling your uncle. And then there's the part nobody talks about, which is just continuing. Filing the report and then going to work the next day. Answering the bank's questions and then eating dinner. Waiting 6 weeks for a process to unfold that was entirely out of my hands. The duplex renovation didn't stop needing to happen because I was in the middle of a fraud investigation. Life doesn't pause. You keep your contractor's number in your phone and you show up with a pry bar when she tells you to, and you pull up flooring because the floor still needs to come up regardless of everything else. The restitution payments come in every month now. I don't think about them much. The duplex upstairs unit has a tenant, a nursing student named Faye who leaves her boots very neatly by the door, and the downstairs is still mine. My gran came in March and stood in the living room I'd rebuilt and said, "You built something." She meant more than the house. I'm still building it. That's the only answer I have. You get knocked back, you find out what you're made of, and then you keep going. Not because everything turns out fine, but because you don't actually have another option that you can respect yourself for choosing.